Murder took place in the home of String Bean Aman and his wife in 1973, when he was a legendary member of the Reynold Opry. Roy Clark recounted the horrific death of his friend and fellow musician David Stringbean Achman, one of the darkest nights in country music, in his final moments on earth. Many have pondered the why and how of the situation for years. In Nashville, this narrative continues to evoke a great deal of emotion. As we reflect on Roy Clark's findings, we invite you to join us. Childhood and early years of David Stringbean Achman. Stringbean, whose real name is David Aman, was born in the hills of Jackson County, Tennessee, on June 17, 1915. The bluegrass state, the geography, the era, and the tight-knit family that brought him up all had an impact on his formative years. Most families in rural Jackson County relied on farming and manual work to make ends meet. Even if life was simple, it was nevertheless fraught with difficulties. As a result, families had to be creative with their spending and prioritized survival over luxury. There were many youngsters living in the Achman home, including David. From a young age on, he understood that everyone in the family had to pitch in to make ends meet. Thanks to his parents' tireless efforts, spending on frills and indulgences was severely limited. It was more common to repair broken items than to replace them. They made their own entertainment, whether it was through music, tales, or getting together with neighbors. If the family wanted to have fun, living frugally instilled in him a reverence for toil and the humble pleasures that originated from one's community and family. Money was tight when David was a kid, but he still desired a banjo. Considering his family's financial situation, purchasing an instrument was just not feasible, but he was not the type to give up without a fight. What little he could gather, he did. Anne repurposed a shoebox, a stick, and string into a banjoic. It may not have seemed like much, but it gave him the opportunity to hone his skills and start to understand the fascinating sounds around him. His initial foray into music was that handcrafted banjo. His perseverance eventually yielded results. Despite his tender years, David made a deal that reflected the hardships endured by rural families and their devotion to music. In return for a genuine banjo, he parted with 2 hens. The exchange was worth it 1,000 times over, in his opinion, which tool eventually became his constant companion. He continued to practice relentlessly from that day forward, teaching himself banjo rhythms and songs until the instrument became an integral part of his identity. However, David had to endure some of the most difficult years in American history before music could completely emancipate him from farm life. He was a young man when the Great Depression struck. Banks collapsed, employment dried up, and already struggling people had even less money to live on. The Amans were among those for whom the Great Depression was more than simply a news story. The cabinets were empty, the days were long, and the money was low, and locals, seeing the crops they've tended to their entire lives eroded. David enlisted in the Civilian Conservation Corps, an anti-depression government initiative that provided employment for young men so he could help support his family. He spent time outdoors as part of his Corps' duties, planting trees, constructing roads, and improving public spaces. The ground, along with those early lessons, this stocky Kentucky child would soon have a career that would make people laugh, sing, and remember him for years to come. The darkness, however, intensified as his tale progressed. No less so the one thing he could never let go of: his fear of becoming String Bean was his fear of losing money. When David Aman was in his late teens and early 20s, music had evolved from a pastime into a serious career. A way ahead was emerging. In his hometown of Kentucky, he was well known for his banjo playing and his gifted performer. He would always bring his banjo to any community event or contest. He had the ability to charm audiences with both his playing and his sense of humor. Between songs, he could effortlessly drop a clever remark or humorous phrase, and his unique blend of musical talent and comedic timing set him apart right away. Asa Martin, a veteran musician, took notice of David at one of these events. As a well-respected performer in Kentucky, Martin frequently welcomed up-and-coming artists to share the stage with him. The lanky young man who played the banjo so passionately and made everyone laugh astounded him. When Martin invited David to join his band, he gave him the opportunity to play at more than simply neighborhood parties. The stage name that would later become synonymous with David was not yet in his possession, though. Just one after introduction by Asa Martin, he forgot David's surname. Upon observing his slim figure, Martin wasted no time filling the space by referring to him as Stringbeans. The audience approved, and the moniker remained. Due of its gradual diminution to Stringbean, David's identity in the global music scene, the moniker suited him just as well as his banjo thereafter. Stringbean's career took off once he got a stage name and started gaining expertise. Joining the Bluegrass Boys, led by Bill Monroe, was his major break in the early 1940s. Even though Bill Monroe was gaining renown as bluegrass's progenitor, his band provided an outlet for up-and-coming musicians. Stringbean considered it a privilege to play with Monroe and an opportunity to study music with some of the most accomplished artists of his day. Stringbean departed from Monroe's group, started collaborating with other artists. Additionally, his relationship with Grandpa Jones was essential to his life's trajectory. Jones, like Stringbean, was a banjo musician and comedic entertainer who loved old-time music and comedy. In addition to becoming business partners, the two became fast friends, performing featured performances that combined musical numbers with comedic sketches. They became mainstays in the country music industry, thanks to the electric chemistry they displayed on stage. Stringbean's career took a dramatic shift when he began performing at Nashville's Grand Ole Opry. Appearing on the OPI was seen as a sign of genuine achievement, since it was the beating heart of country music. There was more to the Opry than meets the eye for Stringbean. It was there that he honed the charisma that would win him fans all over the nation. Stringbean created a unique performing style on the upstage by combining banjo playing with comic acts. Audiences also never forgot his distinctive style. Wearing vintage hats, suspenders, and loose-fitting shirts, he went about his business. The purpose of the attire was to make him look a bit ridiculous. People started laughing even before he uttered a word. The outfit, together with Stringbean's music and sense of humor, contributed to the public's perception of him as a down-to-earth, humorous banjo player who never took himself seriously. A turning point in Stringbean's life was on the horizon. Once again, when he crossed paths with the one who would spend the remainder of his life in his companionship, living it up with Estelle. David Stringbean Achman wed Estelle Stanfill in 1945, at the tail end of World War II. As the nation was starting to settle back into peacetime life, his life centered around his marriage from that point on, life providing him with the familiarity and safety he had always sought. Estelle was renowned for being gentle, quiet, and incredibly supportive to everyone she encountered. She was proud of Stringbean and supported him through his career. Even though she avoided the limelight and preferred to remain in the background, people frequently used the term quiet devotion to describe the couple's bond. They remained inseparable even after they stopped having a family. Their mutual care was evident to their friends and fellow musicians. Even though Stringbean was the one who brought joy and song to audiences, he found solace and stability in Estelle's presence when he was away from the stage. The way they lived together made their love obvious, even though they didn't say a word about it. They tied the knot not long after, and Stringbean and Estelle found a house that was a wonderful fit for their character. In Ridgetop, Tennessee, they settled into a little log cabin. The Achmans opted for simplicity rather than excess, in contrast to many of Stringbean's contemporaries, who took advantage of their popularity and fortune to purchase flashier homes and automobiles. They had a cabin that was plain, country, and warm. It was heated by a wood furnace, had a garden that Estelle meticulously kept, and produced eggs from hens. They prepared the majority of their meals from home, frequently using produce and meats that they had farmed or harvested themselves. This way of living could potentially shock some viewers who watched Stringbean perform weekly at the Grand Ole Opry or on the hit TV show Hi-Ho. It may have seemed strange to onlookers that a widely recognized performer lived such a humble life. Although it seemed wrong to everyone else, Stringbean and Estelle felt it was the only way. They felt accomplished without material possessions, living a simple life, tending to their gardens, going fishing or hunting, and spending quality time together brought them delight. When the stage's musical numbers and hilarity had concluded, the profound poverty that they endured was partly due to Stringbean's mistrust of financial institutions. This mistrust began when he was a little boy, amidst the Great Depression. He seen firsthand the devastating effect that bank closures had on families' life savings when he was a young man. Fear and powerlessness permeated those years, and he carries that memory with him to this day. Funds throughout the remainder of his lifetime. He continued to avoid bank accounts even after he was making a comfortable living as a musician. Stringbean opted to keep his money close to himself instead. He was accompanied with cash. In his own home, he discovered peculiar secure locations to store cash. Rumor has it that he stashed some cash in the chimney. Some thought it might be concealed beneath the floors or concealed behind some loose bricks in the walls. His level of secrecy was never fully known, but word got around fast. Rumors started to circulate. It's possible that Stringbean has thousands of dollars stashed away in that cabin. Despite the apparent tranquility of their home life, their habits, particularly the stash of cash, would eventually draw the attention of those who would do them harm. Eventually, the most despicable individuals would be the ones to bring that attention. Death's nocturnal embrace. Saturday, November 10th, 1973, started out like any other Saturday for most people who knew David Stringbean Achman. Even on this particular night, Stringbean adhered rigidly to his pattern. Before setting out on their weekly journey he was supposed to play at the Reynold Opry in Nashville. Stringbean was feeling great that night at the Opry. He continued to delight the audience with his banjo playing and joke-telling. Later on, other musicians realized that absolutely nothing regarding it appeared to be darkness. Always by his side was Estelle. She kept to herself backstage, speaking gently to onlookers while maintaining eye contact with her spouse. Being accompanied by her was an inherent aspect of their shared existence for Stringbean. After the opera was over, Stringbean did what he usually did. After their appearance on the show, he and Estelle returned to their Tennessee cottage. According to everyone, the drive was average and nothing seemed out of the norm. From the outside looking in, it seemed like any other Saturday night. However, problems were brewing at Stringbean's house, even as he entertained audiences with his music and comedy. It was earlier that night when two Brown cousins, John and Marvin, who had a history of petty crime and stealing, had broken into the Atian cabin. They were impoverished, restless, and frequently in conflict with the law as children. They had also grown more careless in the past few months. The Browns were the latest target of long-running rumors. Because he hated banks, Stringbean stashed a lot of money away in his residence. Word on the street was that he might have thousands of dollars hidden somewhere in his home, including under the floorboards, in the chimney, or even behind the walls. These whispers seemed like a chance for the Browns. They broke into the cabin that November night and waited inside. They had an easy strategy: surprise attack Bean, scare him when he returned home, and steal any money they could discover. They were sure the humble cottage had a secret treasure trove. It was late, around midnight, when Stringbean and Estelle got home from the operation. Unaware of the peril lurking inside, they parked the car and made their way to the cabin. Stringbean was the first one in. The Browns were quick to challenge him. According to the story, John Brown was the one who opened fire, striking Stringbean close to the entrance. Almost immediately after collapsing, he passed away. Frightened, Estelle bolted out of the cottage and headed for the vehicle, wishing to get away or get assistance. However, her journey was cut short. Outside, next to the car, Marvin Brown pursued her and shot her. A brief outburst of aggression abruptly shattered the couple's peaceful existence. Desperate to uncover the money they thought was stashed away in the cabin, the Browns combed through its rooms. Surprisingly though, they turned up far less than anticipated. Only a little quantity of cash was found. Contrary to their assumption of thousands of dollars being stored away, there was no sign of the other alleged riches. Standout pal and fellow Opry star Grandpa Jones showed up to the cabin the following morning. Stringbean's close pal. Going hunting was something they frequently did together, so the two had already planned it out. Jones arrived at the house, anticipating that Stringbean would be prepared with whatever he was carrying. However, what he saw instead would stay with him forever. Jones noticed Estelle's corpse close to the vehicle. Hurriedly making his way to the house, he found Stringbean laying inside, just beyond the doorway. He was shocked. As soon as he realized what had transpired, he departed to seek assistance. He would later say that it was one of the worst recollections of his life. Finding his dear companions in such a dreadful state was something Grandpa Jones could never forget, even though he lived for many years thereafter. Nashville was rocked by the rapid spread of news of the murder, as well as the larger country music industry. The news shocked onlookers, performers, and even the neighbors. It was hard to believe that such a cruel act could be perpetrated on such a modest and generous people. The pursuit of justice would soon commence, leading to the revelation of information that startled loved ones and admirers alike. The town of Nashville was shocked and devastated by the tragic killings of String Bean and Estelle Achman, and the subsequent hunt for their killers. Neighbors murmured about who could have committed such a horrible crime as friends and admirers lamented. Not much time passed for suspicions to start swirling, and the trail ultimately led to two cousins, John and Marvin Brown, who were already known to the police. The small hamlet of Ridgetop was filled with chatter in the days after the killings. Whispers of Stringbean's stashed wealth, and many immediately deduced that heist had been the driving force. However, the first focus was on the unexpected actions of John and Marvin Brown. People were apprehensive of both guys because of their criminal backgrounds, which primarily included theft charges. However, their expenditure was the most striking aspect. The Browns' unusually large financial reserves were observed by the community shortly after the murders. They were spending more money than they typically would have, acting too casually, and buying goods they ordinarily couldn't afford. This was noticeable in a tiny community, where even the smallest changes were noted. Right away, their acquaintances informed the authorities of their worries in a covert manner. Investigators began to suspect the cousins might have ties to the crime due to their brazen manner and carefree conversation. The Browns were subject to increased police surveillance. People in the area who had witnessed the dramatic shift in their routines were interviewed for their accounts. Many felt uneasy after overhearing the males discuss money or string beans in inappropriate ways. Their apparent nervousness, when brought up in conversation about the deaths, was brought up by others. Detectives looked for tangible proof as well. The crime scene had provided enough evidence to piece together what had transpired inside the cabin. But the missing piece was linking it to the Browns. The police eventually had enough evidence to make a solid case. Brown was found in possession of a few stolen things that might be traced back to the Achman residence. There was mounting evidence against them due to the strange timing of their movements, the unusualness of their expenditures, and other factors. The police quickly gained confidence that they were present. The arrest of both cousins within a few weeks of the murders provided some respite to a town that was still reeling from the brutal murders of two cherished neighbors. It all started with the arrests. The subsequent trial drew massive notice, and not only from those in the neighborhood, but from across the country. The courtroom served as a platform for the fans' desire for String Bean and Estelle to receive justice. Multiple sources provided testimony. Jones, Grandpa, who had been the individual who came upon the dead, spoke movingly of the morning he arrived at the site. In order to piece together what happened in String Bean's last hours, other Opry artists shared stories about his personality and habits. A slew of pieces of evidence, including the Browns' suspicious they end up spending to get their hands on stolen goods. The court ultimately imposed severe punishments. As a means of ensuring that the gunman, John Brown, would never be free, he was sentenced to 198 years in jail. Even though Marvin Brown's sentence was reduced, he was nonetheless succeeded for an amount that would ensure him lifelong incarceration. He never saw freedom from prison and died there later. Even after the murderers were put behind bars, a lingering mystery continued to trouble everyone. Find out what happened to String Bean's mysterious buried fortune. A man who was so afraid of banks that he stashed cash all over his cabin became a legend and a mystery for years to come. Then, after over 2 decades, the rumors were confirmed again. In 1996, during the restoration of the cabin, another was discovered: secret warehouse. They uncovered an additional $20,000 in cash, concealed behind a wall that had been sealed for decades. The bills, though, had lost all value by that point. They were destroyed by time and dampness. The currency could not be used since the paper had deteriorated. Swapped out. What was once a modest fortune is now merely an interesting artifact that attests to String Bean's habits but has no monetary worth whatsoever. Additional conjecture was stoked by this second finding. Given the depth to which the funds were concealed within the walls, is there anything more that could be hidden in the cabin or the land around it? The possibility of hidden caches has persisted, even though no new discoveries have been announced. Another conflict mirrored the enigma of String Bean's secret wealth, the concern about the distribution of his estate. String Bean and Estelle did not leave a will or any children behind when they passed away. Court proceedings were then required. To resolve the estate, claims from relatives on both sides prolonged the court fights. Although Estelle's family did receive the majority of the property and possessions in the end, The conflicts had already begun to strain relations, and the discovery of hidden funds had further added complexity. With each new discovery came concerns about whose property it was and who would gain from it. Over time, the courts divided Stringbean's estate, but concerns over his secret fortune cast a cloud over the proceedings. Beyond impacting his day-to-day existence, his decision to conceal funds instead of entrusting them to banks has left a legacy of enigma and strife in the wake of his passing. And while the luck suspicion persisted as admirers reflected on the sad aftermath, the joy in music that Stringbean provided to the world, and what actually set him apart, the tale of Stringbean and Estelle Aman's killings did not die out, even after all these years had passed. Fresh information, unexpected choices, and the public continued to discuss the tragedy due to unanswered questions. The 2014 release from jail of one of the killers, John Brown, was one of the most stunning moments. It was intended that John Brown would never be free again when he was sentenced in the 1970s. The severity of his crime was clearly demonstrated by the 198 prison term he received. A lot of individuals found some solace in that sentence. What this meant was that the man who pulled the trigger would spend the remainder of his life in prison. However, word got out in 2014 that John Brown had been granted parole, which was over 40 years after the murders. Parole officers had reasoned that, at 64 years old, he was no longer a danger to the public. People were furious with the choice. People who enjoy country music, members of Estelle's family and friends of Stringbean expressed their displeasure. Sending someone to prison wouldn't make up for the savagery of the crime, in their view. For many, Brown's release was a further wound to the couple's and the community's never-ending healing process due to the setback. Worse yet, following his release, Brown himself said nothing to alleviate tensions. He seemed distant and unrepentant at times in interviews and statements, while at other times expressing contrition. Many people thought he didn't feel any guilt for what he did, which further infuriated those already upset about the parole decision. And further consequence of John Brown's release was the reawakening of long-forgotten, unanswered issues. The question of whether John and Marvin Brown had behaved independently remained one of the most perplexing. A number of people in the area had a long-standing suspicion that a third party could have been involved. Theoretically, another person had either spent the night at the cabin or had been involved in the crime's planning. The suspicion persisted even when no proof was presented. How the Browns were aware of Stringbean's schedule was another mystery. Very well, his schedule was consistent. Take a Saturday night performance at the Opry before returning home. Was it only that the Browns took advantage of a famous quirk, or did someone give them a hint? A member of the Opry's inner circle, or a neighbor may have supplied information, but no proof of that ever came to light. Countless speculations and rumors emerged over time in response to the unsolved mysteries. While some thought the Browns had inside information from Stringbean's inner circle, others were certain they had acted independently. But I was right about his timetable. When a further $20,000 was found within the walls of the cottage in 1996, the whispers about the hidden treasure began to circulate. Who could have said there wasn't more money if it was still being found after more than 20 years? It has fueling concern that either the Browns had pilfered more than anyone suspected, or that other concealed funds might be lurking about, waiting to be found. These questions remain unanswered to this very day. The event's aftermath has left fans, historians, and residents with unanswered questions and competing theories. Even if the tragedy is still hard to remember, many find that the mystery is what keeps the story going. If you found this video entertaining, please consider giving it a like, subscribing to the channel, and activating the bell icon to stay updated.